Hello, Emmaus community. I am Dr. James Thompson, and once again I have been granted the great privilege of sharing with you stories of our past. A great heritage that represents those that came before us and served as beacons of hope and human achievement. Today I am going to showcase the Tuskegee Institute, which was founded on July 4th, 1881. It is hard to believe that the first classes were conducted in a small AME church that was located only blocks from today's erected building. There were only 30 students in the first year of enrollment. The Tuskegee Institute, now known as Tuskegee University, has enrollment of over 3,000 students. When discussing Tuskegee, we must start with the great Booker T. Washington, who was born into slavery on April 5th, 1856. He would become one of the most prominent educators and facilitator of educators of his or any other time. He served as first president and principal developer of Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute. As the most influential spokesman for Black America, perhaps Booker T. Washington's greatest achievement was for recruiting George Washington Carver from Iowa State University in 1896. By now, many of us know that the brilliant George Washington Carver was mostly known for creating over 300 ways to use peanuts. Carver was considered the savior of the South because he introduced the process of crop rotation that restored the health of the soil that farming cotton had destroyed over the years. The contribution of Carver to promote education and funding for Tuskegee created a foundation for future achievement. This was critical as the country was about to face a vicious enemy by the name of polio, and Tuskegee had to be up to the task. At the end of the 1800s, a new virus called the polio virus made its way into the United States. About 95% of the time, the virus would get into the mouth, pass down to the intestines, and leave the person immune protected. However, 5% of the time, the results would be devastating. Unfortunately, it had a proclivity to attack young children. It could assault the spinal cord and damage neurons, rendering them unable to walk. Many were relegated to an iron lung, which yielded only a 25% survival rate. If it occurred higher up towards the brain, a person would lose their ability to breathe on their own. New York in particular was devastated in 1916 when the polio virus infected over 25,000 people and killed more than 6,000, mostly children. Polio would go on to cripple or kill more than 20,000 children across the nation annually. Strangely, the polio virus also tended to attack the affluent. The man who would become president, Franklin D. Roosevelt, was an Ivy Leaguer and up-and-coming politician early in life. But in 1921, he contracted polio at the young age of 39 while vacationing in the Northeast. He would never walk on his own again. The president's disability resonated with Americans. He became so concerned over the lack of meaningful treatment for polio, he started up a fund for research on infantile paralysis. This would be the birth of the March of Dimes. Hydrotherapy was a form of water therapy that was offered to those who could visit places like Warm Springs, Georgia. There, one with polio could enjoy the buoyancy and warmth of water and the healing rays of the sun. However, Black Americans were not allowed to use these facilities. They could only care for the white patrons at this facility. So to address this, FDR's foundation funded the development of a treatment center where blacks could be treated for polio at the Tuskegee Institute. This would not only be a place for treatment of black children, but also a training ground for black doctors to treat children across America. Around the same time, Dr. Jonas Salk was working on a vaccine to treat polio. His goal was to use a killed virus to immunize children against this plague. A nationwide clinical study involving more than 1 million children would be launched. Tens of thousands of monkeys would need to be slaughtered to test the lots of vaccines before injecting them into people. They had to use animal cells because no human cells lasted more than a couple of days to be used for the research. Once again, a hidden figure from our past came to the rescue. In 1951, a 31-year-old black woman by the name of Henrietta visited Johns Hopkins Hospital with complaints of bleeding. While researching her malignant tumor, it was discovered that her cells grew well beyond the scale in time and robustness compared to any other cell lines ever observed. These supercells, known as HeLa, became foundational for important advances in cancer, infectious diseases, and yes, Dr. Salk's polio vaccine. The next hurdle facing the vaccine was constructing a tissue cell culture factory that would be able to turn out enough cells to distribute all over the country. Dr. Salk's research was being funded by FDR's March of Dimes. His colleague, Basil O'Connor, communicated with Harry Weaver, the director of the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, at the March of Dimes. Weaver was keenly aware of the work that was going on at Tuskegee Institute because of the Foundation's interaction with Tuskegee's Infantile Paralysis Center. So he called on Dr. Russel Brown at Tuskegee. Now let's pause here and consider this. Instead of knocking on the doors of Harvard, Yale, or Princeton, the Foundation appealed to the Tuskegee Institute to take on one of the most important research tasks of the century. Incredible. Dr. Russel Brown had a doctorate in bacterial physiology. He was designated director of this project to mass produce HeLa cells in tissue culture. Dr. James Henderson, also a professor at Tuskegee, would be co-director. He was skilled in plant physiology. Neither one of these scientists had any experience or training in tissue culture. They would spend the next several months learning how the process worked. Turns out these doctors had to travel to the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis to be trained by Dr. William F. Scherr, who was one of the most skilled tissue culture scientists in the country. When they arrived in Minneapolis, they were informed that they would not be able to stay in the dormitory on campus because they were black. We have all heard these stories before. Instead, they would have to be put up on the edge of campus and walk through the bitter cold of winter to and from the lab where the training took place. But months later, they were ready and took their knowledge and experience back to Tuskegee. These doctors even came up with a unique process for cold storage to transport these cell lines. Within a short period of time, after making modifications in tissue culture technique, they had the institute ready to produce. Soon they were churning out up to 20,000 vials of HeLa cells a week for distribution all over the U.S. This was an incredible task that no other lab had accomplished. The vaccination program was a huge success. If not for Tuskegee Institute meeting the needs of the country, desperate to ward off a deadly and crippling disease, many more people would have suffered and died. Once again, the growth and health of the world was significantly impacted by the contribution of these African American giants.